I taught 7th grade English for 19 years. Not because it was the path of least resistance, though people assumed that. The way people assume things about teachers without thinking carefully about the assumption. I taught 7th grade English because 12 and 13-year-olds are the most interesting people in the world, and almost nobody understands this. They are in the process of becoming. The self is not fixed yet. The habits of thought are still forming. What you give them in that window, not information, not curriculum, but the actual habits of mind, the way of approaching a problem, the instinct toward precision and evidence and revision. What you give them in that window matters in ways that nothing you give an adult can quite replicate. I had been doing this for 19 years when the outbreak started, which means I had, by that point, spent 19 years developing the specific skills of managing groups of people who were frightened and uncertain and prone to acting on impulse, and who needed structure without rigidity, authority without authoritarianism, and the consistent message that their situation was manageable even when it demonstrably wasn't. These skills turned out to transfer. My name is Ellen Marsh. I was 44 years old when everything changed, which meant I was old enough to have the judgment that comes from failure and young enough to have the energy that judgment requires. I was not married. I had been once for 6 years in my 30s to a man who was kind and wrong for me in ways that took us both too long to see. I had no children of my own, which is a thing people said with sympathy when they found out, and which I received with the patience of someone who has decided that the shape of their life is not a loss to be mourned. I had my students, 19 years of them, hundreds of them, moving through my classroom and out the other side into their lives, and occasionally one of them would come back and tell me what the year in my class had meant, and those moments were enough. I was in my classroom when the first alerts came through, end of the day, after the students had gone, the particular quiet of a school building after dismissal that I had always found restorative. I was grading papers and eating an apple, and thinking about nothing except the quality of the argumentative essays in front of me, which were variable in the way 7th grade essays are always variable, and occasionally surprising in the way that made the job worth doing. The alerts came on my phone in a sequence that I read with increasing attention, and then with the specific quality of focus that I had developed for situations that required immediate accurate assessment. Not panic, assessment. What do I know? What do I not know? What are my options? What I knew was that the school building I was sitting in was a better option than most. Millbrook Middle School had been built in 1962, which made it one of the older public school buildings in the district, and which meant it had been built when school buildings were built to last rather than to budget. Brick construction, load-bearing walls, the kind of structural over-engineering that the 1960s brought to public infrastructure before cost-benefit analysis became the governing principle. It occupied a city block on the edge of a residential neighborhood, surrounded by a chain-link fence that was mostly decorative but was at least a perimeter, with a large gymnasium, a cafeteria with industrial kitchen capacity, a library, 32 classrooms on 2 floors, and a basement that housed the building's mechanical systems and had been used, in the building's early years, as a fallout shelter. I knew this because I had been in this building for 12 years, and because knowing a building, really knowing it, is something I had always believed was important. I knew where the water shutoffs were and how the heating system worked and which doors locked properly and which ones had warped in their frames and wouldn't seat fully. I knew the cafeteria's storage capacity and the industrial refrigerators and the freezers. I knew the gym's supply closets and the maintenance rooms and the physical education storage areas that contained, among other things, enough sporting equipment to outfit a small army with blunt instruments. I also knew, because the district's emergency preparedness plan was a document I had actually read rather than filed, that the school building maintained a rotating supply of emergency provisions in the basement. Water, food, first aid, the standard provisions for sheltering in place. Not much, but something. I locked the front doors. Then I went to work. The first thing I did was make a list. This is what I do when a situation is large and complex and threatening to become overwhelming. I make a list, not of everything that needs to be done, which would be paralyzing, but of the first 5 things in the order they needed doing. I had taught this to my students for 19 years as an approach to essay writing and had applied it to every other domain of my life. List. Day 1. 1. Secure the building. 2. Assess the supplies. 3. Establish communication with anyone who might be reachable. 4. Determine whether to stay or go. 5. If stay, begin making the building livable. I worked through the list. The building was securable. The supplies were better than I'd expected. Communication was difficult. The cell towers were already inconsistent. Stay or go, I stayed, because I had a building and leaving it meant having nothing, and nothing is always worse than something. By the time it was fully dark on the first day, I had secured every entrance I could find, assessed every resource in the building, and started on the 5th item on the list. I had not slept. I was not tired. Adrenaline is a remarkable pharmacological agent. The children arrived on the 3rd day. I had been expecting adults. The people who would find a school building in the first days of a catastrophe, I had assumed, would be adults who saw the brick structure and the fence and made a rational calculation about defensibility. I had been preparing for adults, which meant I had been thinking about negotiation and authority and the complex social dynamics of frightened, grown people trying to establish a hierarchy in a crisis. What I got was 7 children. They came through the back fence in the early afternoon, the section nearest the residential streets, which I'd left accessible because a fully closed perimeter was more than one person could monitor. I saw them from the 2nd floor window where I'd established an observation point. 7 of them, moving in a loose group with the particular formation of children who are trying to stay together without admitting they're scared, each one trying to look like the being scared was the other person's thing. The one in front was small for what I estimated was her age. 12, maybe, with dark hair cut practically short and the serious expression of someone who had decided a while ago that seriousness was the appropriate response to her situation. She moved with a quality I recognized from my classroom, the quality of a child who has been responsible for others and who wears it the way a coat fits when it's been worn long enough. She saw me at the window, stopped. The group stopped behind her. She looked at me for a moment, assessing, and then she raised one hand in a gesture that was not a wave exactly, more like an acknowledgement. I see you and I am not a threat, and I would like you to decide the same about me. I went downstairs and opened the back door. Hello, I said. She looked at me directly. Are you a teacher? I said, I am. How did you know? She looked past me into the building. The way you arrange things, she said. Inside. It looks organized. I looked at the 7 of them. The ages ranged from perhaps 7 to her 12. 2 boys and 5 girls wearing the mix of clothes that suggested they had grabbed what was practical rather than what was usual. Are you hungry? I asked. Yes, she said. Come in then. I stepped back. All of you. They filed past me with the careful order of children who had decided that careful order was how they were getting through this. The youngest one, the 7-year-old boy with a stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, stopped in front of me and looked up and said, Do you have milk? I don't, I said. I'm sorry. I have water and I have some juice boxes I found in the cafeteria storage. Is that okay? He thought about it. Okay, he said, and went inside. The girl who led them was named Wren. I found this out when I asked, which was the 3rd thing I asked, after whether they were hungry and whether anyone was injured. She told me her name with the matter of fact directness of someone for whom names were functional rather than personal, a piece of information you provide so that communication can happen efficiently. Where are your parents? I asked. Her face did something careful and controlled. Various places, she said, which told me everything I needed to know and which I did not push on. How long have you been together? 5 days. We were on the same street. I knew most of them already. Where have you been staying? A house, she said. But it wasn't safe anymore. She paused. Someone broke in last night. We left through the back while they were in the front. I looked at her. 12 years old, leading 6 children through a city that was coming apart, making the decision to leave a compromised shelter and find another one, arriving at a school building, because she had assessed it correctly as the best available option. "You made good decisions," I said. She looked at me with the expression of someone who doesn't know how to receive a compliment and has decided the safest response is to ignore it. "We're here," she said. "What are the rules?" The rules were the same rules I'd always had, not because I was unwilling to adapt them. Because the rules I'd always had were good rules, developed over 19 years of managing groups of people in confined spaces under varying degrees of stress, and good rules don't become bad rules because the situation changes. Respect the space, contribute to the group, communicate problems before they become crises. No one gets left out of decisions that affect everyone. I explained them to the 7 children sitting around the cafeteria table eating the food I'd prepared, which was simple and adequate, and which the younger ones ate with the desperate focus of people who have not been eating regularly. Wren ate more slowly and listened to the rules with the serious attention she brought to everything. When I finished, she said, "What happens if someone breaks a rule?" "We talk about it," I said. "Figure out why it happened and what needs to change." She considered this. "At our house, we just told them to leave." "What happened when you told them to leave?" "They left," she said. "But they were bigger than us, so it only worked because they felt bad about it." "I understood," I said. "Here we're going to try talking first. If that doesn't work, we'll figure out the next step together." She nodded slowly, like she was filing it for future reference. The 7 children became my first responsibility and my first resource simultaneously, which is the nature of every teaching relationship if you're doing it correctly. You don't simply give to students, you build with them. The knowledge and the skill and the habit of mind that you're trying to develop, you develop it together, which means they have to be active participants in their own formation, and you have to be genuinely responsive to what they bring. What Wren brought was leadership capacity that I had rarely seen in someone her age. She understood group dynamics with a practical sophistication that most adults don't reach. She knew when someone in the group needed to be left alone and when they needed to be engaged. She knew how to make a decision in front of other people in a way that made the decision feel collaborative even when it wasn't, which is the highest form of leadership and which most people learn, if they learn it at all, in their 30s. I told her this directly on the 4th day. She looked at me with the expression she brought to compliments, and I said, "I'm not saying it to be nice. I'm saying it because it's true and because you need to know it. What you have is rare and it's going to matter, so pay attention to it." She looked at me for a long moment, then she said, "Okay, that was Wren. More people arrived in the first 2 weeks. Not as many as I'd expected and more than I'd prepared for, which is the nature of supply and demand in a crisis. A family of 3 from 4 blocks over, drawn by the lights I'd left on in the gymnasium windows at night. A calculated decision to be visible to people seeking safety while accepting the risk that visibility brought. A man named Theo who had been sheltering in his car and who turned out to be a retired paramedic and who I would have paid significant money for in any previous world and who was, in this one, simply a person who needed somewhere to be. A woman named Cass who had been a high school chemistry teacher at a school across the city and who arrived with a bag full of chemistry textbooks she'd grabbed from her classroom, which I found so deeply understandable that I almost cried. And others. By the end of week 2, there were 23 people in Millbrook Middle School, a mix of ages from the 7-year-old with the stuffed rabbit, whose name was Finn, to a 71-year-old former librarian named June who had heard the school had a library and had come specifically because she wanted access to it, which she got, and which she spent her first 3 days in organizing with the focused pleasure of someone doing the work they were made for. The school shaped itself around the people, which is what buildings do when the people in them are paying attention. The gymnasium became the main gathering space, large enough to hold everyone and warm enough when the heating system was running. The cafeteria remained the kitchen and eating area. The library became June's domain and also the community's information center, where she began building an organized collection of every useful reference text in the building and supplementing it with books people brought in. The second-floor classrooms became sleeping quarters, with the smaller children in the room closest to the stairwell and the adults distributed in a pattern that Ren had suggested and that I'd adopted because it was better than what I'd been planning. My classroom, room 214, remained my classroom. I didn't intend this as a statement. It simply remained the place where I worked, where I kept my notes and my plans and the records I was building, and where I thought about what we were doing and what we needed to do next. Ren found me there, on the 9th day, sitting at my desk with the lesson planning book I'd repurposed as a community logbook. She knocked on the open door, which I noted because the other children walked in without knocking, and because the knocking told me something. She sat in the student chair across from my desk. There was something both strange and entirely natural about this, the configuration of teacher and student reproduced in circumstances neither of us had imagined, and she put her hands flat on the desk and looked at me directly. "The little ones need school," she said. I looked at her. "They're getting restless," she said. "Finn cried for 2 hours yesterday and couldn't say why. Myra keeps picking fights. Dov won't talk to anyone." She paused. "They need something to do that means something. They need to learn things." I had been thinking this since day 3, and had been waiting to see if someone else would say it first, because an idea that comes from the group has more weight than an idea that comes from the designated authority, and I had been teaching long enough to know the difference. "You're right," I said. She nodded. "I can help. I'm good at explaining things to the younger ones. I've been doing it since..." "Since what?" She looked at the desk. "Since my parents couldn't anymore." I let that sit for the respectful moment it required. Then I said, "I know. And yes, I want your help." We started school the next day, not school the way it had been. I want to be precise about this because the distinction matters. The school we built in Millbrook Middle School's gymnasium and classrooms and hallways was not a reproduction of what had existed before. It was something different, shaped by what we needed, rather than what the system had required. No standardized curriculum, no testing, no administrative framework, just the fundamental thing underneath all of that, which is the relationship between a person who knows something and a person who needs to know it, and the process of moving knowledge from one to the other. I taught reading and writing to the youngest children because reading and writing are the foundational tools without which every other kind of learning is harder. Finn, the 7-year-old with the rabbit, could not yet read when he arrived and could sound out 3-letter words by the end of the second week, which he did with a concentration and pride that I found more moving than almost anything in 19 years of teaching. Cass taught science, not chemistry specifically, though she had the textbooks for it. She taught observation and hypothesis and the fundamental practice of paying attention to the physical world and asking questions about it. She took the children outside into the school's courtyard, which was enclosed and reasonably safe, and had them observe things and describe them and guess at why they were the way they were and then test the guesses. The scientific method, implemented with a 12-year-old, a group of younger children, and a handful of adults who had decided that learning alongside the children was a reasonable way to spend their time. Theo taught first aid, not the adult version, not the clinical version, the version a 12-year-old could learn and use. How to clean and dress a wound, how to recognize the signs of infection, how to take a pulse and what different rates might mean, how to splint a limb you couldn't set. He was patient and clear and had the quality of the best teachers, which is the quality of someone who has genuine respect for the learner's capacity and doesn't simplify down to condescension. June taught history, not formally. She sat in the library every afternoon and told stories to whoever came, stories about people who had been in difficult situations before and what they had done and what had happened as a result. The children came consistently. So did most of the adults. June understood something that formal history education often misses, which is that the purpose of history is not to memorize the past, but to understand that the present has always been survived before, and that the tools for surviving it are available in the record of the people who came before you. Ren taught navigation. This surprised me until I learned that she had spent 2 summers at an outdoor education camp and had been taught orienteering with genuine seriousness by an instructor who believed that 12-year-olds were capable of real skill. She taught the other children how to read a compass and how to use landmarks and how to estimate distance and how to find north without instruments. She taught them with the directness she brought to everything, making it practical from the first moment, taking them outside to the courtyard and giving them problems to solve rather than concepts to memorize. I watched all of this and thought about what education is for, not what it had been for. The system I'd worked within for 19 years with its standards and its testing and its accountability frameworks. What it is for underneath all of that. The development of people who can function in the world they're actually in, whatever that world turns out to be. We were building that in the middle of a catastrophe in an abandoned school building. With whatever we had and whoever showed up, we were building the fundamental thing. The threat that arrived on day 23 was not the kind I'd been preparing for. I had been thinking about raiders, about organized groups like the ones I'd heard described on the radio before the signals degraded, about the threat of violence from people who had decided that taking was easier than building. I had taken precautions. Hetch had secured the perimeter as best one person could. We had protocols for lockdown. I had thought carefully about this kind of threat. What arrived was a fever. Finn got it first. He woke in the night with a temperature of 103 and the particular misery of a sick child who doesn't understand why they feel the way they feel and can't fully articulate it. I sat with him for 3 hours while Theo assessed him and ruled out, with as much certainty as we could manage without proper diagnostic equipment, the worst possibilities. It was a fever, not the infection, a child's fever, the kind that comes from a compromised immune system under stress, which is what happens to children who have been frightened and underfed and sleeping on gymnasium floors. By morning, 2 more of the younger children had it. By the following evening, it had spread to 4 adults. Theo managed the medical response. I managed the group response, which was in some ways the harder job, because a community under medical threat is a community that needs to believe the threat is manageable, even when you're not certain it is. The line between honest reassurance and false reassurance is one of the most difficult lines in leadership, and I had been walking it for 19 years in classrooms and was walking it now in a gymnasium. What saved us, practically, was the medical supplies in the basement, which included fever medication in quantities that were adequate for the number of sick people we had. What saved us in every other sense was the fact that we had, in 2 weeks of living together, built the kind of community that responds to a member's illness with care rather than fear. Ren organized the care rotation without being asked. She made a schedule, assigned responsibilities, checked in on every sick person twice a day, and managed the logistics of it with the same practical thoroughness she brought to everything. She was 12 years old, and she was running a nursing operation in a school gymnasium, and she did it without drama and without seeking acknowledgement and without stopping. On the 4th day of the fever, when Finn was improving and the others were clearly on the right side of the illness, I found her in the hallway outside the sick room, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up and her eyes closed. She was not asleep. I sat down beside her and she didn't open her eyes. "You did a good job," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I was scared," she said. "I didn't want anyone to see it." "I know," I said. "But they probably did see it and it didn't matter, because being scared and doing the thing anyway is the same as being brave." She opened her eyes, looked at the ceiling. "That's what my dad used to say." "Smart man," I said. She nodded. He was. We sat in the hallway for a while. The building was quiet around us, the particular quiet of a building full of sleeping people, which is one of my favorite sounds in the world and which I had not heard in over 3 weeks without the undercurrent of anxiety. "Ellen," she said. Not Ms. Marsh. She'd started using my first name on day 8, and I had not corrected her because she had earned it. "Yes. What do you think happens after to all of this?" I thought about the honest answer and the reassuring answer, and the way those 2 answers were sometimes the same thing and sometimes not. "I think some version of the world keeps going," I said. "It always has." The shape of it changes, but the fundamental thing, people figuring out how to live together and take care of each other and build something, that part doesn't stop. Because of people like us. Because of people? I said. All kinds of people, most of them trying. She thought about this. Then she said, I want to be a teacher. I looked at her. When things are more normal, or the new version of normal, she looked at the door of the sick room. I want to teach the younger ones properly, not just because someone has to, but because I'm good at it and because it matters. You are good at it, I said, and it does matter. Will you keep teaching me? So I can teach them. I said, that's already what we're doing. She nodded. Good. She stood up and went back into the sick room to check on Finn, and I stayed in the hallway for a while longer, thinking about what she'd said and what I'd said, and whether the two of them added up to something that deserved the word hope. I decided they did. By the end of the first month, we had 31 people in Millbrook Middle School. The fever had passed without serious casualties, which I had been quietly more frightened of than I'd shown. The perimeter was holding. The food situation was manageable but going to require attention in the coming weeks. The school curriculum, if I could call it that, was running every day and was attended by children and adults alike with a consistency that surprised me and then stopped surprising me. What had stopped surprising me was the fundamental human appetite for learning. People think this appetite is a childhood thing, something you have before the world teaches you that knowledge is instrumental rather than intrinsic, but it isn't. It's permanent. It goes underground in people who have spent years in systems that treated them as containers for information rather than participants in understanding. But it doesn't disappear. Give people a reason to learn things and a space where learning is respected, and you will see it come back in people who hadn't felt it in decades. June's library afternoon sessions were attended by adults in their 40s and 50s who hadn't thought of themselves as learners since school. Theo's first aid sessions had produced 4 people who were genuinely competent at basic medical response and who were now teaching what they knew to others. Cass's science sessions had produced, in a man named Dov who had been a postal worker and who came to the first session with the skepticism of someone who has been told he's not good at school and has decided to believe it, a genuine fascination with how things work that he now expressed by examining every system in the building and asking questions about it until he understood. Dov had become our building systems specialist, not because anyone assigned him to it, because the learning had found the thing he was made for, and the thing he was made for turned out to be exactly what we needed. This is what education is supposed to do, match the person to their capacity by giving them access to knowledge and the experience of their own competence. I had believed this for 19 years. I was watching it happen in real time in a collapsed world, which confirmed the belief in a way that 19 years of institutional teaching hadn't quite managed. On day 34, Ren came to me with a proposal. She had written it down, which I found characteristically her. A single page, handwritten, with the particular clarity of someone who has thought carefully about what they want to say and has edited out everything that isn't essential. The proposal was for an outreach program. Her word, outreach. She had learned it from me, she said, and had decided it was the right word for what she meant. The school, she argued, had resources and knowledge and stability that other survivor groups in the surrounding area might not have. Instead of waiting for people to find us, she wanted to send small teams into the neighborhood to identify other groups and offer what we had. Medical assistance from Theo, reference to the library for information needs, connection to our food-sharing network, which was small but growing, and this was the part I found most characteristically Ren. Teaching. She wanted to offer to teach, to other groups, children, and to adults who needed skills, and to anyone who wanted what we had built and couldn't come to us to get it. I read the proposal twice. Then I said, this is good work. She looked at the desk. I know the risk, she said. Sending people out is dangerous, yes, and some groups might not respond well. They might see us as competition, yes, but if we stay inside the walls and don't reach out, we're just surviving. She paused. We're not building anything. I looked at her across my desk. 12 years old. the serious expression that I'd learned to read well enough to know what was under it, which was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. "Give me 2 days to think about the logistics," I said. "Then we'll bring it to the group." She nodded, started to stand. "Ren." She stopped. "You should present it to the group yourself." "It's your proposal," she looked at me. "You're the teacher." "So are you," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the proposal from my desk and folded it carefully and put it in her pocket and left. The group approved the proposal, not unanimously. Theo had concerns about security, legitimate ones, and a woman named Britt who had arrived in week 2 with her young son, and who carried the specific anxiety of a parent who had already lost one child, had reservations that were emotional rather than tactical, but were real and deserved to be heard. I let both sets of concerns fully into the conversation, not because I was uncertain about the outcome, but because the process of the conversation mattered as much as the decision. A community that makes decisions by actually hearing everyone and genuinely weighing the disagreement is a more functional community than one where the right answer is determined in advance and the meeting is a formality. We modified the proposal based on the concerns: smaller teams, shorter ranges for the first expeditions, communication protocols, a checkpoint system so that anyone out in the neighborhood was in contact with the building at regular intervals. Ren accepted every modification without argument, which told me she had anticipated them and had decided they were worth accepting in exchange for the approval. The negotiated thinking of someone who understands that a plan implemented with genuine community support is better than a perfect plan implemented by executive fat. The first outreach went out on day 37. 3 people, Cass, who volunteered immediately, a man named Rock, who had arrived in week 3, and who had a quality of physical steadiness that made him useful in situations that might require it, and Ren, who I argued against including and lost the argument. She argued that she knew the neighborhood better than anyone because she'd been moving through it for a week before she found the school, and that she had established the proposal and should be responsible for executing it, and that if the outreach teams didn't include people who could teach, then the offer of teaching wasn't credible. Every argument was correct. I let her go. They were back by early afternoon. They had found 2 groups, a family of 6 sheltering in a church 2 blocks north, and a larger group of perhaps 15 in an apartment building 4 streets east. Both had received the outreach with cautious interest. The church family had a child with a wound that needed proper cleaning and dressing. The apartment building group had asked specifically about the library, whether it had medical reference materials and engineering texts. June immediately began pulling relevant materials from her collection. Theo went to the church the next morning. What grew from those first contacts was slow and tentative and real. Not an alliance exactly, not yet. More like the beginning of a network, the first threads of connection between groups that had been isolated and were beginning to understand that isolation was a choice rather than a requirement. We shared what we had. They shared what they had. The exchange was not always even, which I explained to the group as not being the point. The point was the connection, which was worth more than any individual exchange. By the end of week 6, the network included 4 other groups, with a combined population of around 60 people, all of them connected to Millbrook Middle School through the threads of what Ren's outreach had started. I want to tell you about the day that mattered most, which was not the day the fever broke, or the day the outreach proposal was approved, or the day the last infected group that had been in the neighborhood moved through and kept going. It was an ordinary day. Day 51, which I know because I was keeping records. I was in room 214, which was still my classroom, grading papers. Not the standardized essays of the old world, the written records that the children were keeping of their observations and their learning, the journals I had asked each of them to start, because writing is thinking and thinking is the most important skill I could give them. Finn's journal that day had an entry that was 3 sentences long, which was appropriate for a 7-year-old 2 months into learning to write. The entry said, "Today I learned about stars. Ren said they are far. I want to know how far." I sat with that for a long time. The misspelling of learn. which I noted for future instruction, the economy of the observation, and the last sentence, which was the thing that mattered. I want to know how far, the appetite for the next question, the instinct that information leads to more information, and that more information is worth wanting. I had been teaching for 19 years. In those 19 years, I had received many student papers that told me I had done my job. This was a different kind of telling. This was a child who had arrived at a school building 2 months ago with a stuffed rabbit and no ability to read, and who was now writing in a journal about stars and wanting to know things. I wrote in the margin, in my best careful handwriting so he could read it when his reading was better, the nearest star, other than our sun, is about 25 trillion miles away. I want to know how far too. Let's find out together. Then I closed the journal and sat in my classroom for a while, listening to the building around me. The sounds of people moving through the hallways. Someone laughing in the gymnasium. The particular rhythm of a community that has found its pace, which is not the same as a community that has found safety, but is something almost as valuable. My classroom looked like my classroom. The books I hadn't taken down. The vocabulary words still on the wall from the last day of ordinary school. The student desks arranged in the horseshoe configuration I'd always used because it meant everyone could see everyone else, which was the physical expression of a pedagogical principle I'd held for 19 years, that learning happens between people, not from person to person. The world outside was not what it had been. The world outside was damaged and dangerous and going to require years of work that I could not fully imagine from where I was sitting. But in this building, on this day, 7-year-old wanted to know how far away the stars were. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was, in fact, everything. I am writing this in room 214, which is still my classroom, which will be my classroom for as long as I am able to teach in it. It has been 4 months. The community has 63 people between our building and the 3 closest groups in the network, which function now as a genuine alliance with shared resources and regular communication, and the beginning of something that might, in another year, deserve to be called a village. Ren is 13 now. Her birthday passed 3 weeks ago, and we made it an occasion which she resisted and which the children insisted on with the stubbornness of people who understand that occasions matter, that marking time is part of how you hold time together. Finn made her a card, which required significant writing assistance from me, and which said, in the careful letters of a child who has been reading for 3 months, "You are my best teacher. Happy birthday, Ren." She read it 3 times. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket, which is where she puts the things she wants to keep. She teaches every day now. The younger children and some of the adults. She has the instinct I recognized from the beginning, and the skills she's been building every day since, and what she does in front of a group of learners is the thing I have spent 19 years trying to articulate and have never quite found the right words for. She makes them feel capable. She makes the knowing of things feel possible and worth wanting. She makes them lean forward. Cass is running a more formal science program now, with Dov as her assistant, and the 2 of them have become the kind of teaching partnership that produces outcomes neither would have reached alone. They have been documenting what they observe about the infection carefully and methodically, with the rigor of people who understand that observation matters even when you can't yet draw conclusions. June's library is the center of the community in ways that go beyond the books. People come to it to think, to sit in a space that holds knowledge and be near it. The library has always been this in every incarnation, a space that says, here are the things humans have learned. You are welcome to them. June understands this better than anyone, and she runs it accordingly. Theo is well. The medical operation he's built is more than 1 person now. He has trained 4 people to competence in basic care and is working on the next level with 2 of them who have the aptitude for it. He is methodical and patient, and occasionally funny in the dry way of someone who has seen enough to know that levity is not the enemy of seriousness. Finn's rabbit is in better condition than it was 4 months ago. Finn found some thread in the art room supplies and asked me to help him sew a torn seam. We sat together at my desk, and I showed him how to thread a needle and tie a knot, and he did it himself, slowly and with his tongue between his teeth. And when it was done, he held the rabbit up and examined the repair and said, "That's good." "It is good," I agreed. "Good enough to last?" he asked. I looked at the careful small stitches he'd put in. "Yes," I said, "more than good enough." He nodded, satisfied, and tucked the rabbit back under his arm and went to find Wren to show her. Outside the window, the city is what it is, changed and continuing to change in directions that are not all visible yet. But the school stands on its block in the residential neighborhood, and the lights are on, and the sounds of it are the sounds of people learning things together, which is what it was always for. I taught 7th grade English for 19 years because 12 and 13-year-olds are in the process of becoming, and what you give them in that window matters. I still believe this. I believe it more than I did before. If more is a direction belief can move, what you give them in the window matters. We are all, it turns out, always in the window. The morning bell would have rung by now in the old world. I don't have a bell. I have a wooden block and a mallet that Dov made for me from materials in the art room. And when I strike it, the sound carries through the building, and the children come to their first lesson of the day with the particular energy of people who expect to learn something. I pick up the mallet. I strike the block. The day begins.